The mist that clung to the valleys of Lancaster County in the early hours of October did not care for the boundaries of men. It rolled thick and white over the paved highways where the 18-wheelers roared, and it settled just as heavily on the furrowed earth of the King family farm, where the only sound was the rhythmic chewing of the draft horses in the lower barn. For Hannah King, the mist was a mercy. It was a veil that softened the harsh edges of the world, a temporary blindness that allowed her to imagine that the horizon did not end at the tree line. Of her father's property, 20 years old, Hannah was standing on the precipice of a life that had been mapped out for her since before she drew her first breath. In 2 weeks, the baptismal vows would be spoken. The kneeling bench would accept her weight, and she would promise. Promise before God and the bishop to remain separate from the world, to be plain, to be still, until the day they lowered her into the hard Pennsylvania clay in a pine box. But this morning, the stillness felt less like peace and more like a weight pressing against her chest, compressing her lungs until she had to step out onto the porch just to breathe. The farmhouse was silent, save for the rhythmic snoring of her dad, Amish, drifting down from the upper floor, and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the front room, a heartbeat that never quickened and never slowed. Hannah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her fingers brushing the rough wool, but her mind was not on the warmth. Her mind was on the hidden loose board beneath her bed and the sketchbook concealed beneath it. It was a worldly object, filled with graphite renderings of things she was not supposed to worship. The way the light hit the neck of a plow horse, the gnarled hands of her gross mammy, the chaotic, beautiful angles of a storm cloud. To make a graven image was pride. To capture the world on paper was to try to own God's creation. She knew this. The ordnung was clear. Yet her hands etched the lines before her conscience could stop them. The conflict of the morning was not usually this loud in her spirit, but today was market day, and market day meant the collision of worlds. It meant taking the buggy down the brooding gray asphalt of Route 30, past the outlet malls and the tourists with their flashing cameras, to sell the quilts and apple butter her mother, Sarah, had labored over for months. Hannah dreaded the staring eyes of the Englishers, looking at her as if she were a museum exhibit behind glass. Yet she also craved the proximity to their chaos. She craved the snippets of music drifting from passing cars, the flashes of color in their clothing, the terrifying freedom in their gait. It was a hunger she prayed against every night, kneeling on the bare floorboards, begging the Lord to take the world out of her heart. But the Lord, in his infinite mystery, seemed to leave the hunger right where it was, festering like a splinter deep under the skin. By the time the sun began to burn through the fog, turning the white blindness into a hazy gold, the buggy was loaded. The smell of the morning was specific to this lifeful mixture of damp straw, curing tobacco from the shed, and the sharp animal musk of the horses. Her brother Levi, 6 years younger and full of the reckless energy of boyhood, held the reins, while Hannah sat in the back, the boxes of quilts wedged around her like a fortress. As the buggy lurched forward, the iron wheels grinding against the gravel of the driveway before hitting the smooth hum of the pavement, Hannah felt that familiar tightening in her stomach. They were crossing the invisible line. The farm was sanctuary. The road was the wilderness. As they trotted along the shoulder, cars whipped past at 60 miles an hour, growing from a distant hum to a violent gust of wind that shook the fragile wooden carriage before vanishing again. It was a reminder of how fragile their existence was, a stick-frame life built on the edge of a highway of steel. They set up their stand near the Birdenhand Market, a place where the scent of pretzels and diesel fumes mingled in the air. Hannah's job was to stand behind the table, eyes downcast but polite, answering questions with the brevity that was expected of a woman who practiced Gallican-Height submission and yielding. "Yes, it is hand-stitched," she would say. "No, we do not use electricity." The script was worn smooth by repetition. But then around noon, the script was broken. A man stopped at the table. He did not look like the tourists who usually bought a quilt to drape over a sofa they rarely used. He was younger, perhaps 24, with hair the color of sand and eyes that seemed to hold a weary intelligence. He wore a canvas jacket that looked traveled in, and a camera hung loosely around his neck, not a small phone, but a heavy black machine with a glass eye that looked like it could see right through her. He didn't ask about the stitching. He didn't ask if she was hot in her bonnet. He reached out and touched the corner of a log cabin pattern quilt, his fingers tracing the geometry of the dark red fabric. "The contrast here," he said, his voice low and devoid of the mocking tone she was used to. "It's incredible. It's not just a blanket, is it? It's a narrative. You're telling a story with negative space." Hannah looked up, startled. No one ever spoke of their work like that. To the Amish, it was functional craft. To this stranger, it was art. "It is just a pattern," Hannah said, her voice barely a whisper, her cheeks flushing hot. "My mother made it." The man looked up from the quilt and met her eyes. The contact lasted a second too long, a violation of the rules of engagement, but Hannah found herself unable to look away. "Your mother has an artist's eye," he said, "and I have a feeling she's not the only one. I saw you sketching in the dirt with a stick by the buggy while your brother was parking. You understand perspective. The accusation for that is what it felt like hung in the air between them. He had noticed the one thing she had tried so hard to hide. Panic fluttered in her throat. "I was just idling," she stammered, stepping back, her hands retreating into the folds of her apron. "We do not draw. It is vanity."
Ow.
The man didn't push. He didn't laugh. He simply nodded, a look of profound sadness crossing his face, as if he understood the cage she was standing in better than she did. "My name is Caleb," he said softly. "I'm here for a few weeks, photographing the harvest for a magazine. If you ever want to talk about idling. I'm usually down by the covered bridge on Tuesday evenings, trying to catch the sunset light." He placed a card on the table, not a business card, but a small postcard of a painting a watercolor of a stormy sea. Then he walked away, disappearing into the crowd of tourists, leaving Hannah standing there with her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The weeks that followed the meeting at the market were a blur of internal warfare. The postcard Caleb had left burned a hole in her pocket, then her drawer, then her mind. It was a window into a world where emotion was captured, not suppressed. The farm work continued, the endless cycle of milking, washing, canning, and sweeping, but the rhythm was broken for Hannah. Every time she looked at the horizon, she didn't see the weather. She saw the composition. She saw the way the blue of the sky interacted with the gold of the corn, and she heard Caleb's voice talking about negative space. The temptation was not just a man. It was the validation of her own soul. To go to the bridge was to court disaster. If she were seen, if the bishop heard, she would be admonished. If she persisted, the ban would be laid upon her. She would be shunned, cut off from her family, invisible to the only community she had ever known. Yet, on the second Tuesday, under the guise of walking to her aunt's farm to deliver a jar of sourdough starter, Hannah's feet betrayed her. She turned left at the fork instead of right, her black shoes crunching softly on the gravel road that led to the covered bridge. The bridge was a tunnel of shadow spanning the creek, a place where the outside world and the plain world met in the dark. Caleb was there. He was sitting on the tailgate of a dusty truck, his camera sitting beside him, unused. When he saw her emerging from the twilight, a silhouette in a bonnet and cape, he stood up slowly, respectful of the distance between them. He didn't smile a predator's smile. He smiled like a man who had found a lost friend. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, his voice barely carrying over the sound of the running water below. "I shouldn't have," Hannah replied, stopping 10 feet away. The distance was safe. The distance was necessary. "I have to go to my aunt's. I only stopped because ... She trailed off, realizing she had no lie prepared that could justify this sin. Caleb reached into his truck and pulled out a sketchbook. It was hardcover, bound in black leather, with thick, creamy paper. He placed it on the wooden railing of the bridge. "I'm not asking you to leave. I'm not asking you to leave your life, Hannah," he said. "I'm just saying that a gift like yours, ... it's not a sin. It's a voice. And I don't think God gives people voices just to tell them to shut up." He stepped back, leaving the book there. It was an offering, a trap, a key. Hannah looked at the book, then at Caleb. The air between them was charged with a static electricity that made the hair on her arms stand up. She took the book. In that moment, the first seal was broken. For the next month, the covered bridge became their confessional. Hannah would bring her drawings, charcoal sketches of the cows, the interior of the barn. The face of her sleeping sister, and Caleb would critique them. He showed her how to use shade to create weight, how to use lines to suggest movement, but they exchanged more than art tips. Caleb told her about the city, about the noise and the loneliness, about the pressure to succeed and the hollowness of modern ambition. He was an Englisher who had everything she was forbidden to have, yet he seemed starved for the peace she took for granted. And Hannah told him about the silence. She told him about the feeling of unity when the whole church sang the slow, chant-like hymns in the Outsider band. The security of knowing you would never be homeless or hungry because the community was a safety net that never broke. "They sound like two different prisons," Caleb said one evening, looking out at the creek. "My world is a prison of too much choice, where nothing matters. Yours is a prison of no choice, where everything matters too much." Hannah looked at him, startled by his insight. He wasn't trying to steal her away to a paradise. He was honest about the brokenness of his own world. That honesty was more dangerous than any seduction. It made him real. It made him a partner. They had never touched, not even a handshake, but the intimacy of their minds was becoming a scandal in the spiritual realm. Hannah found herself rushing through her prayers at night, her thoughts drifting not to the suffering of the martyrs, but to the way Caleb's eyes crinkled when he looked at her drawings. She was falling in love not just with a man, but with the version of herself that existed when she was with him. In the farmhouse, she was Hannah the daughter, Hannah the worker, Hannah the future wife of a farmer. With Caleb, she was Hannah the artist. The crisis came with the harvest moon, bright and terrible in the October sky. The corn was high, waiting for the cutting, and the tension in the King household was palpable. The bishop had visited 2 days prior, speaking in low, grieved tones with her father about the spirit of unrest among the youth. Rumors were swirling. Someone had seen a buggy parked near the bridge too often. Someone had seen a flash of a worldly coat, and thought she had been careful, but in a community where privacy is non-existent. Secrets are like fires in a hayloft. They cannot stay hidden for long. The discovery happened on a Tuesday, the day she usually met Caleb. Hannah was in the milk house washing the steel cans when her father walked in. Most King was a man of few words, his face weathered like an old oak stump. His beard gray and long, he held something in his hand. It was the sketchbook, the black leather book Caleb had given her. Hannah's blood ran cold, her hands freezing in the soapy water. She didn't ask where he found it. She knew her younger brother Levi had likely been snooping. Or perhaps she had simply been careless, drunk on the freedom of her secret. Amos didn't shout. That would have been easier. If he had yelled, she could have defended herself. Instead, he walked over to the wood-burning stove that heated the water for the tank. He opened the book, looking at a drawing of Caleb she had done from memory. The likeness was undeniable. This, Amos said, his voice trembling not with rage but with grief, is a graven image. And this man, he is a wolf. He looked at his daughter, his eyes wet. Hannah, we have raised you to be a light, to be separate. Do you love the world more than you love your own soul? It is not darkness, Dad, Hannah whispered, the words tearing out of her throat. It is beautiful. God made the face I drew. God made the talent in my hands. Why would he give it to me? Why would he give it to me if I am to bury it in the ground? Amos shook his head slowly, closing the book. The devil can mimic beauty, Hannah, but it leads to pride. Pride leads to the fall. He held the book over the open hatch of the stove where the fire roared, orange and hungry. You must choose. Tonight you are not baptized yet, so the ban cannot touch you fully. But if you continue this, if you see this man again, you cannot sit at our table. You cannot live under this roof. We will not harbor a rebel spirit. He dropped the book. Hannah surged forward, a cry escaping her lips, but it was too late. The pages curled, the charcoal faces twisting in the heat, turning to ash and smoke that rose up the chimney and vanished into the cold night air. The destruction of the book broke something in Hannah. It wasn't just paper. It was the murder of the other Hannah, the one who could see and speak. She ran from the milk house, past the garden, past the barn, her heavy skirts tangling around her legs. She ran until her lungs burned and the tears blinded her, collapsing by the fence line that marked the edge of their land. The moon looked down, indifferent. She had a choice. It was the choice every Amish soul faces, usually during Rumspringa, but for her, it was violent and immediate. She could go back to the house, apologize Neil, and marry Isaac Yoder next spring. She would have children. She would have community. She would never be alone, but she would never draw again, where she could leave. She could walk down that road, find Caleb, and step into the abyss of the English world. A world where she knew no one but him. A world where she would be damned by everyone she loved. The next 24 hours were a silent agony. Hannah went through the motions of the day baking bread, sweeping the floors like a ghost haunting her own life. Her mother, Sarah, sensed the shift. She saw the redness in Hannah's eyes, the stiffness in her spine. Sarah didn't speak of the book, but as they were kneading dough side by side, she reached out and squeezed Hannah's hand. It was a grip of iron, a desperate anchor. The world out there is cold, Hannah, Sarah whispered. Here, there is warmth. Here, we carry each other's burdens. Out there, you carry your own. It was the strongest argument for staying. The community, the barn raisings, the quilting bees, the knowledge that if you fell, 100 hands would catch you. If she left, she would be an orphan in a universe of strangers. but the fire in the stove had burned away her fear, along with the book. That evening, Hannah asked to take a walk, to clear her head. Her father looked at her, searching for repentance in her face, and saw only a blank mask. He nodded, perhaps hoping the solitude would bring her back to God. Hannah walked out of the house, wearing her heaviest shawl and sturdy boots. She didn't take a suitcase. She didn't take clothes. To take a bag would be theft. Everything she owned belonged to the family. She took only herself and the small wad of cash she had saved from selling eggs, hidden in her stocking. She walked past the barn, breathing in the smell of the hay one last time, engraving it into her memory. She walked down the long driveway, and she didn't stop at the road. She turned left. Caleb was at the bridge, wasn't taking photos. He was pacing. He had felt the silence, the mist meeting the day before. When he saw her walking down the road, not in the buggy, but on foot, moving with a grim determination, he stopped. He saw the empty hands. He saw the tear-streaked face. He knew what it meant. He didn't run to her. He let her cross the distance on her own. This had to be her walk. When she reached him, she was trembling so violently her teeth chattered. "They burned the book," she said, her voice flat. "My father burned it." Caleb's face hardened, a flash of anger crossing his features, but he suppressed it. "And you?" he asked. "What do you want to do, Hannah?" "I want to draw," she said, looking up at him. "I want to see the ocean. I want to know if I am empty without the rules, or if I am full." It wasn't a declaration of love for him, though that was there. It was a declaration of self. Caleb nodded. "My truck is right there. If you get in, we drive to the city. I have a friend with a studio apartment. You can stay there. It'll be loud. It'll be bright. It'll be scary as hell. And I can't promise you it will be better than this. I can only promise it will be yours." Hannah looked back at the road behind her. The darkness hid the farmhouse, but she could feel it. She could feel her mother setting the table for supper, counting the plates. She could feel the hole her absence was about to rip in the fabric of their lives. A sob climbed up her throat, choking her. To choose herself was the ultimate act of selfishness, the ultimate sin, and yet she could not turn back. The fire in the stove had severed the cord. She walked to the truck. The door handle was cold chrome, alien to her touch. She pulled it open and climbed up into the cab. The smell was different. Here stale coffee, gasoline, old fabric. Caleb got in the driver's side, didn't say a word. He didn't turn on the radio. He started the engine, and the mechanical roar shattered the peace of the creek. As the truck pulled away, the headlights cutting through the dark, Hannah refused to look in the side mirror. She stared straight ahead, her hands gripping her knees until her knuckles were white. They drove past the Amish farms, past the buggies with their dim orange reflective triangles, past the silos standing like sentinels against the stars. With every mile, the knot in her chest tightened, a physical pain of tearing away. The transition was not the romantic escape the movies promised. The first night in the city was a sensory assault. The lights never turned off. The sirens never stopped. The apartment was small and smelled of cleaning chemicals. Hannah sat on the edge of a mattress, still wearing her plain dress and cap, looking like a relic displaced in time. Caleb was kind, but he was also part of this alien world. He showed her how to use the microwave, how to lock the deadbolt, how to turn on the shower, simple things that felt like mountain climbing to her. When he left her alone to sleep, promising to return in the morning, Hannah curled into a ball and wept until she retched. She prayed, but the prayers felt like they were bouncing off the drywall ceiling. God was in the fields. She wasn't sure if he was here in this box of concrete and steel. The days turned into weeks. The English clothes felt light and flimsy on her body. She cut her hair, a traumatic act. That felt like an amputation, staring at the long strands in the sink with horror and fascination. She got a job washing dishes at a diner, the only work she was qualified for. It was hard, hot work, but for the first time, the money she earned was hers. She bought a sketchbook, a real one. She sat in the park and drew. She drew the pigeons, the homeless men, the skyscrapers. Her hand had not lost its skill. If anything, the grief had sharpened it. Her drawings were haunted, full of shadows and longing. Caleb encouraged her, helped her apply to a community art class. They were a couple now, navigating the strange waters of a relationship without the rule book of the ordnung. It was messy. They fought. Hannah had panic attacks in supermarkets. She missed the silence. She missed the certainty. 6 months after she left, Hannah wrote a letter. She poured her heart onto the paper, telling her parents she was safe, that she was drawing, that she still believed in God, just not their rules. She told them she loved them. She mailed it to the farm, with no return address, afraid that if they knew where she was, they might come or worse. The bishop might come. She waited. She didn't expect a reply, but she hoped for a sign. A month later, a letter arrived at the P.O. box Caleb had set up for her. It was her own envelope, unopened. Across the front, written in her father's heavy block handwriting, was a single word. Zurückschließen refused. Hannah stood on the sidewalk outside the post office, the traffic rushing by in a blur of noise. Noise and exhaust. She held the returned letter, the paper crinkling in her grip. It was the final door slamming shut. They had done what the faith demanded. To them she was already dead. If they communicated with her, they endangered their own standing, their own salvation. It was an act of love in their eyes. A harsh discipline meant to drive her back to the fold. But standing there, in her jeans and denim jacket, with her short hair blowing in the wind, Hannah knew she would not go back. She could not fit back into the mold. She had expanded. She had seen the world, and it was full of pain. Yes, but it was also full of color. Years later, the gallery opening was small but crowded. The series was titled The Plain and the Hollow. Charcoal sketches of Amish life, but viewed from the outside, faces turned away, buggies disappearing into fog, empty dresses hanging on a clothesline like ghosts. Hannah stood in the corner, wearing a simple black dress, nod to her past, but cut in a modern style. Caleb was there, older now, his camera still around his neck. He squeezed her hand. "They are beautiful, Hannah," he whispered. And they were, but they were also tragic. A woman walked up to a drawing of a farmhouse. "That looked suspiciously like the King farm. It looked so peaceful," the woman said, sipping her wine. "So simple. Do you miss it?" Hannah looked at the drawing. She looked at the graphite rendering of the porch where she used to shell peas, the window where she used to dream. She could almost smell the hay. She could almost hear her mother singing a hymn in the kitchen. The ache was a permanent resident in her heart now, a dull throb that never fully went away. It was the price of her ticket. She had traded belonging for becoming. She had traded safety for a voice. She looked at the woman and smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I miss the peace," Hannah said softly, "but I do not miss the cage." She turned away from the drawing and walked toward the large glass window of the gallery. Outside, the city was alive with lights, a chaotic, beautiful, terrible ocean of humanity. She pressed her hand against the glass, leaving a faint print. She was here. She was real. She was Hannah. And as she looked out into the night, she whispered a prayer not in the high German of the church, but in her own words, thanking God for the burden of freedom and forgiving the Father who loved her enough to let her go, even if he had to close the door to do it. The mist was gone, the view was clear, and for the first time the horizon went on forever,